Welcome. Welcome to Gallery Talk. My name is Nancy Najelski. I want to start off by thanking the staff of Horizon House. This would not have occurred. This is technically a very difficult event, and we had tremendous and wonderful help from a number of people within Horizon House. Jess and Nick and Brian and Nika. I don't know how many people. So we're going to be doing some things technically here today that have never been done in Anderson Hall. So you guys get to see it first and foremost. So today we're featuring Brom Wikstrom. Brom's going to do a presentation, brief presentation, and then we're going to have Ani, his wife, there, talk a little bit about how they met. And while he's doing a demonstration, I'm going to be doing what we call either a Barbara Walters or a Nancy Cope interview. And while he's demoing his stuff. So just to tell you a little bit, Brom and I grew up in Seattle. We attended the same schools from grade school through high school.
Unbelievable. Yeah.
Unbelievable, I know. I actually cannot remember a time in my life when I did not know the Wikstrom family.
There you go.
When Brom was, 21, I think it was,
Yeah.
He injured his spinal cord in a diving or a swimming accident in the Mississippi. I remember visiting him at the UW Medical Center during his rehabilitation and watched as he made his journey from painting with his hand to painting with his mouth. He's internationally known. His art has been displayed around the world. He's received many awards, and we are very fortunate to have him today. So please join me in welcoming Brom Wikstrom.
Like Nancy was saying, we go way back, and in elementary school it was, St. Margaret's, and it was, I kind of tried conformity back in those days. And, I was an altar boy, I was a Boy Scout, I had a paper route, I did kind of all those things that you're supposed to do to learn responsibility and to, try and be part of the system. It didn't work out for me so well. I decided I was going to be an artist and kind of took it upon myself to be a nonconformist at that point. I loved the beatnik era. My father had a great library and was a big history buff, and so he instilled in me a love of adventure and travel around. So I could hardly wait until I was old enough to, stick my thumb out on the highway. And I hopped freight trains as a kid across the country, and it was really a very, very exciting time for me. But I knew that I was going to have to, kind of settle down eventually. And so I took a couple trips. Oh gosh, I went up to Alaska, worked in a seafood processing plant, and hopped freight trains back to Chicago to attend a international blues and jazz festival that was all great and everything. But I ended up in New Orleans, and in New Orleans I found a job working as a sign painter, and loved the job, loved the city. The music is all great down there, and the climate and architecture, and they really know how to celebrate. And I really saw myself staying in New Orleans, at least, into my 20s for a while. It seemed to be a nice base of operations for me, because you could get off into the Caribbean or across to Mexico or up the eastern seaboard, and really loved it. But, I wasn't that familiar with the place. So if people would have told me, don't go swimming in the Mississippi River, I probably would have believed them. But I did, and I dove into shallow water and hit my head and injured my spinal cord. And I thought at first that I would kind of break my talk up into kind of before and after my injury, but I realized that there's actually two other stages in my life that are equally important and amazing. And the first is meeting this wonderful woman here. So Ani and I got together 35 years ago now, and it's been a remarkable journey for the two of us together, and all the places we've been and the people we've met and stuff has been nothing short of astounding. And then the last stage I've just learned about is retirement. And I'm loving it, but I'm finding that there's more to do in retirement than I ever had going on for me in my business career. So we recently bought a little place up in Anacortes, and just about the time when I was wondering whether my interest and passion in art was going to begin to maybe diminish a little bit and start to slow down, nothing like getting a new place up in the Skagit Valley to reinvigorate your passion in living in general. So we bought a little place, a historic railroad house that they had made available to their employees back in, I think it was built in 1906 or something like that. And so when we got it, it was in pretty sad shape. But we spent a year and a half or so designing and adding a gallery space onto it so that I can show my work as well as the collection of Northwest artists that I've collected all these years. And my father was an art director here in Seattle, and so he always had a studio at home and another one downtown, or he had a lovely place on Westlake over by the lake. And my brothers and I, would just dearly love to go and spend time seeing what he was working on, and decided about that time that I wanted to pursue a career in art. So I took all the classes they let me in high school, and then took a couple years at Seattle Community College after graduating. But I got to mention, in high school, when I was still trying to kind of figure out my future and what I was going to do with my life, Nancy had been employed or enlisted to serve on the yearbook staff. And when they made mention that they didn't have an artist lined up to do the spot drawings and stuff, she brought up my name. And I was only too happy to participate in getting these drawings done for the annual. Turned out to be the first published work that I had, and really kind of set me on a path to take it a little more seriously. And it's worked out very, very well for me in that regard. But once I got hurt, I spent a year and a half in rehab at the University of Washington Hospital. And it was a wild trip coming up from New Orleans when I still had tracheotomy tubes that I was breathing out of and all kinds of IVs going and stuff. But they managed to get me back up here. And thankfully, back then, this is 1975, they weren't in a huge hurry to get you out. And I don't know if it's insurance issues or what the reasoning is, but I did have some complications. I had a pressure sore that needed to be addressed before I could really begin my rehab process. And so a whole year at University Hospital was what I needed at the time, just, I guess, mentally and emotionally to deal with this change that had taken place. Because you can see I can move my arms around fairly well, but I don't have the manual dexterity that would allow me to do the kind of work that I had always done prior to my injury. And so, here I thought at first that I would do my fine art just for my own enjoyment and amusement. Maybe I'd enter shows once in a while or anything. But I never really considered that I'd be able to make a decent living based on my fine art. So I went the commercial route and did a lot of store designs and show card lettering and things like that. And it worked out pretty well. I was learning how to do neon signs and working for one of the big electrical sign companies in New Orleans at the time of my injury. But when I was in rehab, of course, in the occupational therapy department, I would use a stick in my mouth to operate a keyboard or to turn pages in a magazine or whatever I was doing. And it seemed kind of a natural extension to try that out with drawing and painting. And you can imagine how discouraging it was at first. I could barely make a straight line, let alone try and create an image that was satisfying in any way. But, you know, all the things I couldn't do, the things I could do was sit at my art table at home and just keep painting until something broke for me. And what it was that really broke for me was an opportunity to start a volunteer program at Children's Hospital. And a friend of mine had been going up there for a little while, and just very informal. Every other weekend we'd spend a few hours and setting up in one of the day rooms and working on the teen unit mostly, and then in the rehab unit as well. And it was so satisfying just to, you know, be able to get out of the house and do something productive and get that sort of response from not only the patients and their families, but the doctors and nurses who really saw the value of bringing a creative, artistic experience to the patients. So I decided I'd go ahead and seek funding for that. And by going to the Seattle Arts Commission, which was really the main funding source back then, they were only too happy to give me a 6-month grant to develop the program a little bit more. And so I was up there for a year at 20 hours a week. And it was wonderful because I got to sort of learn the process of grant writing and working with other artists that were also doing that kind of stuff. And just a great way of sort of learning about the system of how do you, you know, kind of bring all these other avenues together in order to have a successful career in the arts. So I've done guest teaching in the schools and tons of art festivals and different things like that. But the experience at Children's introduced me to a wonderful organization called Very Special Arts. And Very Special Arts is an educational affiliate of the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. And so they, you know, host artists in residencies, not only in the schools, but in settings like this. And so I met a lot of other, not just visual artists, but musicians and dancers and literary people who all had one kind of disability or another. And so they roped me into serving on the board, of course, and doing committee chores and things like that. But I'd always been a member of the Puget Sound Group of Northwest Painters. And that is a group that started out here in Seattle in 1928, and by mostly all professional artists, whether they were professors or commercial illustrators, graphic designers, people that were in the trade. And their big thing was they funded the group through an annual auction. And so all the members donated a beautiful piece that would be auctioned off at a fundraiser. So great bunch of guys, wonderful friends. I'm still in the group. I serve as the group's historian. And so, you know, coming up 2028 is the group's 100th anniversary, and we're excited about the opportunities of maybe get an institutional show in one of the museums, maybe the Fry, producing maybe a book, documentary, different things going on with that. But my other volunteer activities that resulted in this wonderful change in my life, meeting Ani, was at the University of Washington. When I was an inpatient, the dental school had asked me to give a presentation just about what is life like with a spinal cord injury and what are the special considerations that a dental student would need to know about if they were to ever have a patient that had a spinal cord injury, and what to expect and how to make that experience as trouble-free as possible. So they assured me that I would get a free cleaning every 6 months or so. And lo and behold, I came in for my cleaning, and that's how we met. And I'll let her tell you a little bit more about how all that happened. But it was, I'm a firm believer in the opportunities that come around as a result of volunteering your time and giving, time away from others, and just, helping make the world just a little bit better. And one of the things that Ani and I have taken a great deal of pleasure in is our association with our church. And Sally Cummings is part of our congregation, and it's been a wonderful experience to. And Diane, good to see you. So, Ani is much more involved than I am. She has served on the session and sings in the choir, and is very, very active. And I've participated in, little arts-related things, and I'm happy to do that. Yes, we do have a men's group that Sally's husband Bill was part of, and we get together every other week now, just a little coffee time. And it was amazing at first because I was the kid in the group, and they were all the old timers, and it was wonderful to hear their World War II stories and growing up in Seattle back in the early days. And of course now I'm one of the older guys, and it's a whole different experience to be the one sharing wisdom and sort of being a part of the church in that regard. But it's brought a lot of joy into our life, and something that we look forward to continuing. So I guess I need to talk mostly though about the biggest organization that has affected our lives, and that's the International Association of Mouth and Foot Painting Artists. And there's some catalogs from our shows and some of their publications going around. And these guys have been around now over 70 years. And they started out in Europe. Liechtenstein is where our international headquarters are. But they have over 70 countries represented. And it's one of the most amazing organizations that you can imagine. It's a for-profit organization, and so our work is sent out direct mail. Everybody gets 5 or 6 complimentary cards and maybe a calendar, and they've done very well. And we have 700 members around the world, and I'm very fortunate to be one of very few life members here in the U.S. I think there's 4 others. Yeah, there's a little brochure that comes around with our stuff. And as nice as it is for us to actually, have a living and have my artwork reproduced around the world, one of the most satisfying things for us is the periodic conventions that the group hosts. And we just got back actually from Copenhagen, where we had an exhibition of our work at the Royal Opera House, and it was a wonderful experience to get together, of course, after a few-year hiatus with the pandemic going on. But these are like families, and we've watched each other grow up and develop as artists, and just to see how everybody's art changes over time and what they're able to accomplish has been just great. So I encourage you, there is an address on the back, and I've actually been trying to encourage them to sort of do bulk mailings to assisted living centers and places where the residents could have the freedom to have cards to send out to their family and friends and stuff. So something that we always encourage. And of course now with computers and emails and things, people aren't sending out greeting cards like they used to. So we're trying to address that and to figure out how the group is going to sustain itself over the next generation or two. But it's been a wonderful opportunity for us to get together and have my work shown around the world. Gosh, we've been to Shanghai and Sydney and Athens and kind of all over the place. And it's always a challenge to travel, but we've been pretty fortunate to be able to take side trips. And so whenever we get an occasion to have a journey someplace, we always try and fill in some places. Ani had spent some time before we met in Lugano, Switzerland, and speaks Italian. So she's taken me back there a couple times. And it's a wonderful experience to be able to do all that stuff. So looking forward to more and more of that coming up. So thank you. We'll turn it over to Nancy.
Actually, to Ani.
Or if Ani wants to.
Talk about how you guys met.
I think Brom covered it all. I was living in Lugano, and I had a dream that.
Make it a little louder. Point it towards you, Ani.
Like this? Okay. Can you hear me now? Okay. Anyway, I was living in Lugano, Switzerland, and working as a dental hygienist, and I had a dream that I was supposed to come back to America and get married, and I thought, I don't want to get married. So it kept happening, and so I thought, okay, I'll go back. And I came back, and you have to wait 6 months before you can get your dental hygiene license here. So I got involved in a program at the University of Washington called DECODE, Dental Education for Care of the Disabled. And I was working as a hygienist there, and they told me I had a patient that morning, and it wasn't supposed to be him. And they switched patients, and he came into my room, and his brother transferred him into the chair. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is the guy I'm going to marry, that I came back to America to marry. But I didn't tell him that. I thought he might not understand. But anyway, we did start dating, and I think, didn't you leave something, or?
Oh, you left a pair of sunglasses at my house.
Oh, that's right. And so I had to go pick them up. And we started dating, and it's just been one adventure after the other, and we've been married since 1989. And it's a new adventure all the time. And people ask me, how do you take care of somebody in a wheelchair? And I don't know. It just happens, and we help each other. And I think God has a lot to do with it, and He helps me a lot. So we love each
And
other.
we should mention that Ani had 2 daughters when we met, and those 2 daughters have now produced 5 grandchildren and 4 great-grandchildren in our lives. And so they're all based out in Texas. We don't get to see them quite as often as we'd like. But wow, big family already, and getting bigger all the time.
Well, Brom is going to do a bit of demo of his painting while I ask him my questions, because he can actually talk while he's painting. So I'll just ask away, and you can just chime in whenever you want to, Brom.
Okay.
I was glad he mentioned his father. I knew his parents quite well. His mother was actually my CCD or CDC or CCD teacher. Is that what they called it, Sally? I can't even remember. You know, when I was going to public schools, and his dad took me to actually his art studio and showed me around his art and stuff. His father was quite accomplished in his own right. Didn't he have some art exhibited at SAM? Wasn't
Yeah,
that?
they did an annual
Yeah.
show at SAM,
Yeah.
and he got in on that a few times.
Yeah. And Brom's mother was pretty talented too. She was very much into quilt designs. One of her quilts I own upstairs. And you had these 2 artistic parents. So my question to you, Brom, was, did you figure... I think the battery died. It's nothing.
Here, you can have this one.
With these 2 artistic parents, did you ever think there was a possibility you could do anything other than art? And if you thought about something other than art, what was that?
Oh gosh, that's a great question.
Thank you.
Because I never really did consider, what else would I have done? People have told me that I have a nice speaking voice, and I thought, oh, well, maybe I'll do
We've talked about that.
voiceovers
We've
and
talked
stuff.
about that.
Yeah, so I might have sort of naturally gravitated towards that kind of thing. And now in retirement, I'm doing more writing. And, you know, I was fortunate that reading and writing came fairly easy to me early on. So something maybe along those lines, but definitely something that would have needed some creative input, I think.
When he speaks at church, they call him the voice of God. Is that right? Yeah.
Did you hear what she said? When he speaks at church, they call him the voice of God.
Because he reads the scripture and they
Yes.
say, oh, the voice of God.
So Brom mentioned that we went to high school together, and he did all the art for our yearbook. What he didn't mention, he did that when he was a junior and I was a senior, and they didn't allow juniors on the yearbook committee. But they made an exception for Brom because of how talented he was artistically, and as I think I remember that you remained on the yearbook committee for them when you were a senior. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, so he was on the yearbook committee for 2 years. That had never occurred before, and as far as I know, it never occurred since because they only allowed seniors on the committee. But they made an exception for Brom because of his talent. And so when we were on the yearbook committee together and he did the art, I did all the typing of the yearbook and organized all the photos. And I remember at the time thinking that I didn't understand why, even though I had a lot of craftsy talents using my hands, that I couldn't create drawings like he could. And it wasn't until after your accident, Brom, and you started learning to paint with your mouth that I realized that artistic talent isn't in one's hands, it's in one's head. And that never occurred to me until I saw you make this transition. So my question to you did it occur to you before you started painting with your mouth that talent is in your head, in your mind?
Well, I'm trying to think. Maybe I know when I became aware of Dale Chihuly's work, and he's so successful, and his work is so accomplished, but of course he can't do it all himself. So he has to have a whole studio of people working, and I think that's when I kind of realized that it is your concepts that you come up with in your head that sort of decides what the colors and shapes and dimensions and all the patterns and stuff, and all that has to get worked out in your head before you even start doing any artwork. So that's the way I got it.
Excuse me, Nancy, would you mind moving because God is painting your head?
Oh, really? How's it look? How's that? Is that okay? Further? You want me further over? Do you want me out of the room? How's that? Is that okay? Okay. So when you made this transition, Brom, from painting with your hand versus your mouth, I can imagine it must have been difficult. And did it ever occur to you that maybe some artists could not make that transition? Or do you think that's true? Or do you think all of them could eventually if they worked at it hard enough?
I do think that everyone could, yeah, if they worked hard at it. I guess, I looked around at some of the other sort of artists in the past. Toulouse-Lautrec might come to mind. He had certain physical disabilities that didn't hold him from working. I know Renoir had horrible arthritis in his later years. Monet was almost blind when he created his Water Lily series, which is kind of what his reputation rested on, at least in the latter part of his career. So I think Degas, too, another, artist that was able to transition from doing paintings to doing sculptures or something. So I think a lot of artists, and I've seen them now grow, especially with this Puget Sound group that I'm in, because a lot of them are professional painters, but then they retire, and then it's like, so what am I going to do, with my time now, and how am I going to create? One fellow in particular comes to mind. Fred Thomas was a wonderful commercial artist. His most famous piece is the smiling Eskimo on the tail of Alaskan Airlines. And so he had a very successful career and suffered a an awful stroke later on. But he was telling me, and he said that he was thinking about me during his rehab process and how I had kind of been able to make a transition to doing my art a different way. And he said that because of being an artist and having such a highly developed eye-hand coordination, because of his painting skills, that he was able to overcome his stroke in a very great degree. He still has trouble walking around and stuff, but as far as his eye-hand coordination, it's still there for him. So I think everybody kind of learns how to sort of adapt to something as long as they're willing to keep going. In fact, I've seen some paintings here by Manfred Lindenberger, who I got to know pretty well, and he also had kind of a second bit of a career. He was always very graphic, very sort of detail-oriented in his earlier life, but as his skills started diminishing a little bit later on, he kind of loosened up his style, and he started using brighter colors and working a little bit in maybe like a Mark Tobey style, where kind of an all-over design and stuff, and had a renaissance with his work, and really became very, very popular and got associated with some of the better galleries in town. And so it's nice to see that does happen.
Do you remember the first painting of yours you ever sold? What it was? How you felt?
No, I
You
can't
don't?
recall that. I remember my first commissioned piece.
Okay.
In fact, we were talking, someone here has a study that I did where the Easter Seal Society commissioned me to do a portrait of T-Chuck, the otter, that was born at the Seattle Aquarium. And it was a big, big deal because it was the very first otter ever born in captivity, and they were so proud of that. And they gave me an opportunity to do a little portrait of T-Chuck, and I don't know where it is down at the aquarium, but it's up in somebody's office somewhere.
Was it hard to get him to hold still for the portrait?
Yeah, right. It's like, so I don't mind working with photographs, so that's exactly what I did.
Whose art or art forms have inspired you?
I don't mind claiming Picasso as a hero, and I think somebody like him who, he sort of learned the rules before he started breaking them, I think is kind of important. It's sort of easy enough for anybody to throw some paint out and, mix it up and try and let their intuition balance all the different elements. But I have a great deal of respect for somebody like Picasso who, he went to art school and he drew from plaster casts and really got down that classical training before he started going out and expressing himself in different forms.
So tell me, I think about the things that you painted when we were in high school, and now what you're doing is different from that. So tell me about how your art has evolved with the things that have impacted that evolution. Is it just where you are in your life, or?
Yeah, it is where I am in my life. I think back then, I was so inspired because my dad was a commercial artist, and he was an excellent calligrapher, and I love typography. Even to this day, I just love the way letters and shapes and things come together to convey a message. And when I was first starting out learning how to be an artist with the intention of having it as a career, I was looking at old psychedelic posters, and it was a psychedelic era, and they were taking kind of strange liberties with not only typography, but all kinds of visual sort of appropriation of other images and stuff. And so I guess I was influenced by the art that was being produced during that time, and just sort of incorporated that in whatever else it was that I was doing, whether it was landscapes or still lives or anything. But I love kind of playing around with perspective and shapes and different colors and things, and recognized even back then that it was something that I'd be able to do my whole life, that computers weren't going to come along and make me obsolete or anything, and that I'd be able to hang out with other creative people, and I just knew that it was going to be a very, very satisfying life.
When I think about your art that I've known over these many, many decades, we didn't mention how old we are, so let's keep that quiet. That some of it has been kind of abstract, some of it's been extremely detailed, some of it's been more kind of freeform. So you've done a lot of different kinds of styles and thoughts and stuff, and that's just been curious to me.
And I'm not even sure if that's to my advantage or not, that I don't have like a signature style that, you know, I mean, people now can look across the room at a Morris Graves or something and recognize who the artist is. And they would have a difficult time with me. But I think that comes from kind of splitting my time up between commercial work and more fine arts. So it's, yeah, and it's nice because I don't really know where it's going, and sometimes I can do paintings that kind of touch on both. And I don't know, one of the things that really was striking for me was before my injury, because I was involved in the commercial field, I did a lot of black and white, a lot of pencils and pen and ink, because, you know, when you finish a drawing, that gets turned over to the camera department and they add the colors and Ben-Day dots for halftones or whatever it is. And so after I got hurt and started using the brush in my teeth, you know, it was a little harder to kind of bear down with a pencil or a pen as opposed to using a paintbrush. And so I developed a color sense that I never really had considered that much before. So the other thing is, you know, I've always been inspired by Northwest Coast Indian artwork. And much of their work is very formal, the sort of form line designs that they use for their totem poles and things has that hard edge to it that I've always just loved. And I didn't mention my years of working at the Burke Museum. And that was an occasion where I had approached the State Department of Vocational Rehabilitation at one point, trying to figure out how I was going to sort of build a career and actually, you know, make a living at that. And the state DVR is tasked to do that for you. So they will buy vans for people if they need transportation to and from work, or a modification on a job site or whatever. And so they actually called around, and I told them I'd be willing to volunteer my time to establish a position. And they had originally thought that maybe I could work at a gallery, a commercial gallery, and handle the phones or do some clerking or something like that. And I wasn't too excited about, you know, maybe doing something like that. But when they contacted the Burke Museum and told me that I would be okay to come in and basically do work that the facility manager was doing, of answering the phones in the staff areas and working for all the different departments, I jumped at the opportunity. It was such a great occasion and wonderful, wonderful bunch of people that I got to work with there. And so 36 years later, I finally hung it up, and they gave me a nice lifetime membership as a going away gift. So I'm still over there. And those of you who've seen the new building have really enjoyed seeing the different collections and things that they have over there. So it's a great, great place.
Governor Gregoire appointed you to the Washington State Art Commission and also as one of her advisors on cultural initiatives and art-related programs. So tell me how that came about.
Yeah, I don't know if it was, you know, diversity is always, you know, something to be considered at those places. And by then, this is 2007, which was frankly kind of an awful time, because you remember the recession that we had a year later. And so where we had been able to, you know, as a commission, go and visit some of the outlying communities and towns and stuff around the state, all of a sudden the funding dried up, and there were across the board hiring freezes and cuts. And there was even an initiative at one time that they were going to roll the Arts Commission in with the Trade Commission, as I recall. And then they learned that they would not get funding if they didn't have a standalone Arts Commission. But I think what was really encouraging for me is that they, the people that were running it, the other artists that, like myself, were participating as commissioners, kept their passion. And they were able to kind of work within the limitations that had kind of come down. And at a time when everybody might have been very, very depressed about the state of sort of arts funding and sort of, initiatives that people recognized that it was important, and that it was not only kind of an extra sort of fun activity, but an actual driver of economic development. And I think, it's really, really important that a lot of people learn during that time, especially how important the arts can be in the lives of people.
And you were invited to the White House, and you met President George Walker Bush. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And so I want to know, how did the Secret Service treat you? And did President Bush ask you to do a campaign poster for him?
Yeah, right. Not quite like that. But yeah, no, it was one of those occasions, and this is with this very special arts group. We've actually been invited to the White House a few times, and it's part of the festivities that go on at the Kennedy Center. And it's only been for Republican, believe it or not, administrations. But Nancy Reagan was there on another occasion where, and what was great about that is my mother and father and I traveled around the country. We had gone down to New Orleans for the World's Fair that they had back in 1984. And so from there we went on up to the Capitol, but since we had our own transportation, we got to the White House before anybody else. And it was pretty special to sort of be right there. And so I made sure and got right on the rope line there, when the dignitaries, whoever it was coming by. And it was a wonderful experience. Had a big party, and I think Tony Randall was our master of ceremonies. And so it was really fun.
And you did a demonstration of your painting style for Andy Warhol. Is that true?
Yeah, now the Andy Warhol, I didn't know it was happening, actually. What had happened was, this was at the Kennedy Center itself, and they had set me up as one of the art stops so that people coming by could see my work, and I'd do a little demonstration. Back then I was doing portraits, just little line drawings of some of the festival goers and stuff. And so I was just kind of doing my thing, and I stopped and turned around, and Andy Warhol was watching me. And so I get to say, that I taught Andy Warhol how to paint. But he never took up mouth painting. I can't understand it. I just don't.
And you met the Emperor and Empress of Japan.
Yeah.
Right? What were they
yeah,
like?
that was really incredible, because we had already been that summer to Europe, and I had never been to Europe before, and there was a festival happening in Brussels, Belgium, that I got to be a delegate to. And so no sooner had we come back from that trip that I got a call from this very special arts group, and apparently the Japanese ambassador's wife was on the board of this very special arts. And they had made it very clear that they wanted to meet just regular people. They were, touring the US. I don't know how many places they went to, but their stop in Washington, D.C. was at a gallery that this very special arts operated. And so it was, we were nervous as all get out, but they were so gracious and just so pleasant, and made us both, feel very, very welcome, and we were happy to, they saw me do a little bit of painting, and we brought in a young lady with a disability to serve as my model, and spent, I thought I was only going to get 3 or 4 minutes, but we ended up visiting for really quite some time.
Como News featured you in a story about your art being exhibited in China. So can you tell us how that came about?
Well, China, Shanghai was the site, gosh, I want to think 2005. My Mouth and Foot Painting art group had a convention, and they'd been trying to kind of reach out and open up new sort of avenues for their commercial business. And so our convention was happening in Shanghai. And I knew that that was going to be happening, and I had already talked to Como, and they had said, you know, if you can get any footage of you actually painting in China at the exhibition, we'd be happy to include that in the report that they were going to put together. And you know, when we always have these openings of our exhibitions, there's usually artists doing stuff during the opening. But I had gone like a couple days later, and the shows, sometimes they're only 5 or 6 days long. Other times they're, you know, a month or so. But I had gone just to do this filming for the Como report. And I was so surprised because there were the regular kind of volunteers that were doing security and stuff during the show. But there were other like school groups that were touring the exhibition. And so here where I thought I was just going to do a little photo op at a table turned into a huge, big production with all these other students and other visitors to the gallery. So it turned into, you know, really quite a nice little deal for us.
So Ballard High School Foundation Art Committee chose your art for their collection. I wondered how that came about, and did you consider, as a Queen Anne graduate, that you were actually conspiring with our rival?
Oh, yeah. Well, unfortunately, by that time, Queen
I
Anne High
heard
School
what
was
you
all
said
done.
about Ballard versus Queen Anne and the
Yes,
art.
those Beavers. No, that was a great deal. Matthew Kangas is a sort of roving art critic here in Seattle. And, you know, he'd heard about me through my older brother, Bill, who is also an artist and had a little gallery and such. And so, you know, people have trouble with Matthew from time to time. He's a little opinionated, and he likes his abstract art and doesn't give a lot of credit to those representational artists out there. But, you know, hey, that's his personal take on things, and I'll go with that. And he did come to my first opening that I had, my first solo show. And so I consider him a friend and somebody who's kind of followed my career and shown an interest. So when he was tasked with organizing the collection there at the Ballard High School, he thought of me and called me up and asked me if I had any pictures of Ballard. And I was hard pressed, but managed to find a few little kind of modernist, Cubist style pictures that I had done looking out towards Ballard. And that was good enough for him, and they put them up in the office. So it's right in the principal's area is where my thing is.
Well, you know, I mean, you've traveled the world and you've done demonstrations of your art and been displayed all over the world. Tell me what you consider some of the greatest highlights of your career.
Oh, wow. Let's see. Well, I would say the Albertina Museum in Vienna would probably be up at the top, because not only did I have some of my paintings on display, but they asked me if I would demonstrate my paintings also. So here's, you know, like a very fancy affair. And we'd actually been in Vienna a few times because it's close to Liechtenstein, and it was convenient for our association to organize an exhibition there. But this particular year, the legal advisor to our group had donated his private collection to the Albertina. And so they were having an exhibition, and he had some wonderful paintings in his collection. And so they were honoring him at the same time, and I felt very, very special to be a part of that celebration as well. So that's probably, you know, the biggest museum, but we've always been, you know, pretty good about having our shows not just in some little gallery, but actually in some of the more cultural institutions that they have.
Susan just told me she wants you to paint.
I can do that. I can do that. I'll try. I'm actually kind of ventriloquistical that way. So normally I'll just kind of start putting colors together and see what comes up. But we were talking about the work that I did for the Seattle Aquarium, and I haven't done that much of it lately, but what I really enjoy is doing kind of watercolor and then coming back and doing like a pencil over the top of it or charcoal or something. So I never really know kind of where I'm going until I get in on it.
We have former aquarium employees here at Horizon House.
Oh, yeah.
So when you think about it, Brom, this accident propelled you into becoming a mouth painter. And so that puts you in a very specific category of artists. And so one of the questions we had was, when you think about that, do you think about that some people may see that category first versus your art first? And does that frustrate you or does it bother you?
Well, I think what I'm finding out is that most all artists kind of have a niche that they're, you know, whether it's their patrons or whether they work in, you know, a school setting or something. But I've known enough artists now. I think of my friend Alfredo Arguin, who passed away this year, who, you know, he was Hispanic and he made no bones about it. And so he's represented in the Smithsonian collection of portrait he did of Cesar Chavez, kind of a thing, you know. And I remember, I've got a great story about Jacob Lawrence. And he had a retrospective in New Orleans just before I got hurt. And it was there that I learned that he was a professor at the University of Washington. And so after I got hurt and I was going through rehab and everything, the recreational therapist was always after me to go out to the movies or go out to Furcrest and use their swimming program and stuff. And I just wasn't interested. I just, you know, I don't know if I was depressed or what the deal was, but I didn't want to go and do the fun stuff. So he asked me straight up, he said, you know, what can I do for you? And so I talked to him and I said, well, you know, if you want to have Jacob Lawrence come by and look at my sketchbook and maybe give me a little critique, I'd be happy to do that. Not really thinking that, no, Jacob Lawrence is going to show up. And I was in like this circle bed at the time that sort of rotates you around so that you don't develop pressure sores and things. And so I'm like, you know, I'm supposed to be turned. It's like time for me to be switched. But I've got Jacob Lawrence here. We're talking, you know. And so when I did a guest artist program with a group at the United Cerebral Palsy Center. And here comes Jacob Lawrence again, and he's volunteering his time there as well. So great guy, wonderful to talk to him. And I asked him, I said, so how does it feel, you know, that you're recognized as the foremost, quote, African-American artist? And how do you feel about that? Because I'm a, quote, disabled artist, you know, and I usually put an artist with disability or a person with a handicap maybe. And he said, you know, you don't have any control over that. People are going to call you whatever it is they call you, and you're not going to be able to really change that. So you just go with whatever they want to come up with. So that's the way I go with that.
So you're using watercolors right now? Do you usually paint in watercolor?
Yeah, and the nice thing I like about watercolors is that you can use it transparently or kind of more opaque. And as much as I wish I could do more in acrylics and oils and stuff, there's just too much prep involved. Somebody's got to squeeze the tube out for me and you know, make sure my brushes don't get too gummed up and all that stuff. So watercolors, you know, I can come in and work for an hour or two and then come back in later and pick it up from there. So that's what I like about watercolors.
I paint in oils. I didn't start painting until I retired from dental hygiene, and he was quite an influence. Said, why don't you take some classes? So I took classes in oils, and so I do oils and he does watercolors.
She's done some great stuff.
How do you think your career would have been different, Brom, if you hadn't had the accident? What do you think you would have?
How my art career would have been
Yeah.
different?
Do you think it would have been primarily commercial?
Well, I really did like sign painting. And I mean, I didn't really see that there was a tremendous amount of growth and opportunities necessarily. But what I was hoping to do, and I was in the fabricating wing of things, so I was trying to work into the art department where I'd be designing signs and, you know, being a little more creative in my stuff. So that's where I was working at. So I think that is probably where I would have gone. But I sure ended up being very surprised at how much I enjoyed teaching. So I teach both mainly in elementary schools where, you know, it's not that they don't expect that much out of you necessarily, but they've got that enthusiasm, you know. They're not just there to get an easy grade or something, but they really just love to create. And especially children, you know, they have kind of this innate, instinctual approach to creating that I still get the biggest kick out of. In fact, what I look forward to the most when we do these classroom visits is that, and actually we were talking about our friend Mary March, who was teaching ESL, and she'd have me come in, and for both her classes and these elementary schools, I'll get maybe 2 weeks after a presentation that I'll give in a school, I'll get some thank you notes from the kids that are all illustrated, you know, and the words are misspelled or whatever it is, but the passion there, you know, and the enthusiasm that the kids have, and it really comes from their heart, and just, you know, thanks for coming, here's what I learned, sort of stuff. And same with Mary March's classes. Got some wonderful letters from that.
Do your teeth get sore?
No, my neck does sometimes. But Ani had studied as a massage therapist too. So she gives me a little neck rub and shoulder action once in a while.
I was surprised at how good his teeth were.
They want to just watch you paint for a little bit here.
Well, what's fun about this is I'll lay in these shapes, you know, and stuff, and try and balance things around. But then later on when I get home, you can see I'm using a long brush here, but my tables at home come up right where I can use a smaller brush and get a lot more detail and things going on. Yeah, this is what it might turn into. We'll see how it goes. But, and we just had our first studio tour in Anacortes. So the 98221 zip code, there were about 30 artists altogether, and they were all over the place, all over Fidalgo Island up there. But our place is right in Old Town, so it's close, it's right across from the library, and really convenient. So the only other places in Anacortes itself, in downtown, were the galleries and a couple places there. So we were really the only sort of residency where people could come and tour through the collection. And we've got, oh gosh, over 200 paintings on display, and a fair number of mine and Ani's, but also some really amazing examples of some of the Northwest's leading artists, mostly the commercial artists. There was a fellow, Harry Benath, who used to do the paintings for the Seattle Times and some of those old rotogravure covers from the color section of the paper. It's just amazing. So I've got a couple beautiful things of his. So it's great to have. And my father's work that I have, some of his Boeing illustrations are really cool because they're like rocket ships, you know, really neat stuff.
We're just going to sit here and watch you paint.
Yeah, I am.
I can answer questions too.
Yes.
Here, does your mic work, Bonnie? Do you guys want to maybe ask Ani some questions while Brom paints? That's why I was saying maybe she can answer some question while he paints.
Is this his travel set of watercolors.
It is.
At home, he has a bigger.
Yeah.
So
He has about 4 sets. Oh, sorry. Yes, he has 4 sets of paints. And that is the travel set, and
It's been all over the world.
And over on this table here, we have some samples of his art.
we had 300 people come through Anacortes in 2 days. So it was quite an adventure. And everybody was so nice. Yeah.
I'm just wondering, I'm seeing that he's painting with a very fine brush. I see Brom is painting with a very fine brush. Do you ever use a broad brush or any other kind of brush in your work?
Yeah, not as much as I'd like. One of my favorite artists in the Northwest is Kenneth Callahan. And he would get in there like basically with a mop and get his sort of, the first layer in. And then he would like get like a rag or something and he'd dab at it. And then after looking at it for a while, he'd decide, which end is up and what do the different shapes indicate to him. And one of his favorite subjects was equestrian. So you'd see horses and things all through his work, and they were just amazing. So I do have a museum quality piece of his up in Anacortes that you're all welcome to come and see sometime. It's like great.
See the examples up here, they're astonishing, but they don't show up on the screen, I think.
Even if you put them on that.
Oh, yeah, okay. The variety is really amazing.
No, they're not showing. They have to be out.
If you do it right.
Yeah, some of these.
If you just hold it up right
Oh.
to the right of his paint, there it'll
Oh,
show up on the
here.
screen.
It's not being shown on the screen.
There.
There.
We had a little cabin
Turn it upside down.
Oh, thank
up on the Skycomish River where some of these sort of trees and natural seeds. Now that one is upside down.
She told me it was upside down.
That's the way it's supposed to go. That's the way it goes.
I'm sorry to be a so incompetent. I didn't rehearse this. Yeah. Wow, these are really amazing. There's such a variety of different.
Now it's being shown. You can see it.
You see it?
Yeah, now that.
You can see. Why don't I hand them to you and you can hold them up with your better.
Yeah, I think Nancy was talking about how my work has a lot of detail, but now that I'm getting older and some of my skills are starting to flag a little bit, and I knew this was going to happen, that I'm kind of like loosening up my style a little bit more and enjoying it, but kind of missing those occasions where I could really get that line exactly where I wanted it and stuff.
Is this recent then?
Pretty recent, yeah, probably within the last 2 or 3 years anyway. And I don't do a lot of nocturnes, but we do have this view from our house. So it's, boy, has it been changing the last few years.
So what about this type here?
Oh, yeah.
This one. Oh, these are kind of inspired by Northwest Coast Indian designs. And what I was trying to do on that one is have, like, if the eyeballs are ahead, then you can kind of make out a figure kind of coming down off of the heads a little bit. So that's kind of the approach I was going at for that. Yeah, and you can kind of see, well, that other one has a similar thing going
Yeah, cool.
with the kind of legs down below and things.
So you're not afraid to go in every direction?
Yeah, no, huh? And I mean, I guess I'm lucky in that I don't have to do paintings that I think are going to sell necessarily, because I'm under contract and I get a nice little monthly stipend from my group. And even though they're not going to put this kind of thing on greeting cards or calendars, they might exhibit it. They might put it in a show someplace.
Is this recent?
There you go. Yeah, I think they did actually make that into a card.
That's gorgeous.
And they're not real good about letting me know when and where some of my work is reproduced, but
Liechtenstein State
So many different.
put their stamp on the back of this, 130 over, and then his name down at the bottom.
well, that's one of the nicest things about the group is that I do maintain ownership of all my work. They have reproduction rights, so I can't go get limited edition prints done or something like that. And people buying my work do kind of understand that that kind of isn't allowed either to have prints made, which I don't know anybody that would do that anyway. But some of these are kind of inspired by my time with the Burke Museum, especially these prehistoric looking things here, kind of cave drawings.
Where is that?
That's, you know, kind of an amalgam of things. I think growing up in Seattle where we've got nothing but hills, it seems kind of a nice approach to kind of stack things. And I'll, you know, not only stack buildings, but I'll stack faces and like in a crowd or something like that too.
These are all, I have no idea what order they're in, so I'm just.
Oh,
Matter. And
I don't either. This is a little garden shed that we used to have in our old backyard here. And I think, you know, inspiration is kind of where you find it. And I remember one of the things I like about Andrew Wyeth's work and his son Jamie Wyeth, who I actually have gotten to meet too, is where they've decided to live endless opportunities, whether it's just turning a corner and, you know, looking at a rock from another angle and kind of putting that into a scene is very, very exciting. My father told me he had his teacher in watercolor was Rex Brandt down in California. And his advice to his students was to open up a garbage can and just look down and see how all the colors and shapes and textures all go and just find immense inspiration right there.
Is there any questions out there? Did I ask all the ones that you had? Well, just speak up and I'll come running to you.
I have a very crass question. Do you make some money with what you do?
Sure, yeah. In fact, this studio tour that we did the other day, this past weekend, was so great because, you know, I didn't have to add that gallery commission, which sometimes is like 50%. So to have to double your prices gets kind of daunting sometimes. And like this, I was able to kind of just have a bunch of art out. So I didn't have to go through that extra expense of framing it and stuff, which is also pretty pricey. So nice to be able to do it a little more casually. Normally I don't have, you know, kind of my doors open and people coming into the studio and looking around. And I enjoy commissions. I don't do a lot of them, but every once in a while, my painting association will ask me to do a particular kind of painting, whether it's I didn't bring any of my Christmas designs, but it's kind of difficult at times to keep my sort of enthusiasm up for a painting that, you know, of a Christmas tree or something. But I just keep remembering, you know, who's paying the bills and what my obligation is to those guys. But now that I've been with them for over 30 years, I think I have a little bit more flexibility in how much time I devote to sort of, you know, themes that are kind of specific to them. But I still enjoy that kind of stuff too. And the nice thing about the Christmas work, and we did have a few for sale, I don't know if we actually sold anything, is that people bring them out at Christmas time. You know, so they're not on the walls all the time. And
That's what I do with the one you painted.
Yeah? You have it
I have
all
one of your
the time.
Christmas trees.
Do you? Oh, good. Yeah, and they're really nice to sort of get out there and stuff. I got quite a few of them.
In looking at some of your paintings here, there are different styles. Some are representational, some are abstract. When you sit down to paint, do you know what you're going to do, or does it just happen, just evolves
Yeah.
as the mood strikes you?
A little bit of both, actually. You know, these that I've been working on lately have really been fun because I have kind of a general idea of what I'm trying to get at, but it's not all worked out ahead of time. I know when my father, his commercial art business, he had, we called it Lucy, an overhead projector. And so you could do a little sketch, and then you could put it into this camera and blow it up and make correcting, as you went along and stuff. So there's certain sort of mechanical processes. I know my Photoshop pretty well, and it does come in handy, if you're trying to get your values right, and different tricks you can do. Turning your picture upside down, for example, will give you a different angle and vantage point on the piece that you're doing. So yeah, I don't know. It depends where the inspiration comes from. And because I like doing different types of things, is that, I can work in watercolors for a while and then switch over to pencil or change the size of brush I'm working on and stuff like that. And I found that I kind of actually enjoy working with an old, worn out brush, that it's not so precious, And a lot of work, some of these you've seen, I'm doing them on cardboard. And there's something kind of intimidating, I think, about breaking out a brand new 300-pound, Arches watercolor. You don't want to mess it up, So you got to be like, I don't know, it's intimidating to me sometimes. Whereas if I just get just any old piece of paper, now I have freedom. Now I feel much more relaxed. I'm not going to ruin anything. And those are usually the ones that turn out better than what I want. So you never really know.
Some of your Northwest art is so precise. Some of the lines are so parallel. Do you have any kind of mechanical help when you do that? I mean, it's just fabulous.
Really, what I find is once I'm committed, and most artists, they're going to use their hand to kind of steady where that brush or whatever is going to go. And I don't have that luxury. So usually once that brush has touched the surface, now I'm committed. And I find later on that it's harder for me to kind of get the across stroke going. So that's why I'm turning my papers around a lot more. Instead of trying to get around something, I'll just do it because I can still get a really good solid stroke, this way. But I'm having to, especially if I'm doing a curved shape, I have to turn it and then turn it and turn it, and kind of work it around that way. So I don't know. And the other thing, of course, is I'm somewhat limited in size. I mean, this is a big piece for me here that I'm working on. And even though I do have a mural down in Kent that the city put on one of the sides of their buildings, it started out not any larger than this originally. So, and the thing that I did for the aquarium piece is I did the otter on a separate sheet, and then I did a border around it of starfish and crabs and shells and stuff, and did that on an entirely separate piece so that they could kind of mount one under the other, because I would have been hard-pressed to paint it. But normally I paint kind of on the flat like this. My table at home is angled a little bit, but when Ani does her painting in oil, she's working at it, and it's upright and a little more conventional. So, and many of the artists in our group will paint that way. But the way that I've done it, I just kind of do it this way. And I think with watercolor especially, if you're working really wet, well, now you got to worry about dribbles and things like that. So working like this, I don't have that to deal with. So it's fun. These are fun because I get to use all different colors. Quite often I do kind of monochromatic stuff and kind of just work with values and things. But it's kind of fun to come and see where these are going to go. And from here, we're going up back to Anacortes. We're having a family reunion come in. My 92-year-old aunt is coming in from Chicago and bringing one of my cousins. And we don't want to think that this might be her last time out here, but we're taking the occasion to bring as many of our family together and stuff. So over the next few days, we've got quite a bit of whale watching and all kinds of stuff going on. But we're really looking forward to seeing them. Our place up there, we're really excited that we closed in a little tool shed, or a tool shed, carport that we had, and made a little studio apartment. And so the plan is to have artists in residence to come in, and hopefully some of my mouth and foot painting colleagues. A couple of them come up to see the property, but that was before we finished it and stuff. So I'm really, really excited about seeing if the association wants to kind of get behind an initiative to actually help bring some of the artists in and help us put them up and stuff. But now that we're getting to meet some of the neighbors, we're hoping that that maybe we could get them to come out for a program and maybe have some of the artists give a presentation and share their work. So we're really excited about the possibilities of doing that. I had gotten a residency to go back to Vermont, 5-6 years ago, to a place called the Vermont Studio Center. And they bring in artists from all over the world. And I got a grant through something called the Nielsen Foundation. And they provided me with a studio and a nice little apartment for the entire month of September, which in Vermont is like the month, you know. So we, and what was great about it is that you get to collaborate with some of the other artists that are in residence, and you're encouraged to try things kind of outside your comfort zone a little bit. And so what I had done, and I haven't done this yet, which I'm not sure why I haven't followed up on it, but I have a metal arm brace that I put on my forearm, and it sort of brings my fingers together into a pinch. And I'll use it when I'm eating, you know, I can get a fork or a spoon in there and feed myself. But I had never really used it much for drawing or painting. And then I saw Chuck Close work. And Chuck Close, of course, had a spinal injury condition of some sort and had become quadriplegic. And he used a metal brace on his arm exclusively to do his work. And I think it seems to me he had to kind of steady it with his other hand and stuff. But, you know, you can't do any better than Chuck Close. And so what I did, I had started, they had provided us with a model every morning. And so I filled up a couple sketchbooks with these very loose, kind of sketchy, sort of, you know, drawings of the model. And then I'd take them back into my studio afterwards. And with a brush in my teeth where I could have much more control, I'd kind of outline it or fill it in and stuff. So it was really a neat kind of combination of styles and approaches to making the work. And I did a couple like landscapes doing the same thing that were fun to do, but I haven't stayed with it long enough to see where it would kind of develop. But I liked kind of the crudeness and the more sophisticated, detailed stuff. It made for a really interesting kind of combination. So we'll see. Pick it up.
Other questions out there? Brom and his older brother Bill had a gallery, and Bill did the framing. Is that correct, Brom?
Yeah, how great to have a in-house framer right there.
I'm just noticing as you're painting that each color is staying separate, and I could picture if I had a paintbrush and some yellow and dipped it into the red or the blue, I don't know what color I'd come up with.
They would run together.
Well, I don't mind. It does kind of, you want to get in there and work, but sometimes you got to wait for things to dry. Especially when you're working on a sketchbook like this, that it's not stretched out like this. I can be as wet as I want, and when it dries, it'll get nice and tight again, whereas this is going to stay pretty darn wrinkled on me. And haven't figured out how to like iron it or something.
I stretched these boards on here. We wet this art piece. Oh, okay. Excuse me. Okay. We wet the canvas and then put it on the board and then tape it down, and then when it dries, it's pretty tight. So I do 3 or 4 of these at a time. And he works from the sketchbook and the board. And see? Okay. Okay. There we go. There we go. Yeah. Huh?
It doesn't just look as bright on the screen as it really is.
Oh, yeah.
I've sure enjoyed the collection of art that you guys have here. There are some amazing pieces. So you're very, very fortunate to have such a great collection.
A question. Is there any way that you can describe your process of learning how to gain more skill as a mouth painter?
Yeah, good question. You know, I think like any artist, you're going to learn by looking. I certainly aspire to the quality of work that I see among some of our senior members of the group. And as much as I would like to sort of sign on as a student of some of these guys, I've seen enough of them work to sort of pick up little hints of ways they go about it. And one fellow in particular I think is just amazing. Kunshan Hishe is from Taiwan. And he lost 2 arms and part of a foot through an electrical accident. And he's got such a great attitude. He's on the board now. And he will do these really large things. He did something every bit as big as that stained glass mural at the back of koi in a pond or something. And just amazing that he's able to get in there. Of course, he can stand on his feet, so he's able to kind of move around a little bit more, and he can get all over a canvas. But to have that kind of ambition and skills to match it has certainly been inspiring to me. So I've got a wonderful bus mural. The city has that wonderful program of decorating the murals. And so I took one of these designs, a little bit like these faces, where it's all hard edge, but it's all kind of intertwined figures of things. And it's up right in front of our church.
28th and Dravis.
Yeah, 28th and Dravis over on Magnolia. And thankfully, it hasn't been tagged. People have been respectful. And when we had it dedicated, we actually came out as a church family, and the minister, blessed it, and it was really a nice little deal. So I might do another one of those. That was really kind of fun to do.
But I have to tell you, he goes to about anywhere from 20 to 50 art museums a year. We did a cross-country trip, and I think he did 70 art museums. So he's, really inspired by seeing a lot of different work.
Yeah, I had a question which probably can't be answered, but can't hear me? I just wondered about the foot painters. Do you have any friends that are foot painters? How on earth do they go about that?
I can answer that. A lot of them weren't in an accident. He can't feel anything from here down. But they maybe were born without arms and decided to paint with their feet. And we have a very good friend in Milan, and she's a dancer, and she's a mouth and a foot painter. She paints with her mouth and her feet. And so I think if you don't have arms, you get to decide if you want to paint with your mouth or your feet. And I think they switch back and forth, some of them, and some of them just pick one and stay with it. It's really interesting. I mean, I find myself staring at somebody who paints with their feet. Their toes, their toes are different, and they hold their brush with their toes. And her name's Simona, and she's been without arms since she was born. She was born without arms, and so her foot is up here all the time, and it looks like her hand. She just kind of has her foot up here, or this foot, and you don't really realize that it's her foot until you go, oh yeah.
A couple of our members were victims of thalidomide, and that was going on and stuff. So
I saw on Google the other day that there is a world-class French horn player who was born without arms.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And
Wow.
he played in the last night of the proms at the Albert Hall. So it's really worth looking at the last night of the proms.
Wow. Well, of course, Christy Brown of My Left Foot was an early member of our group, Irish painter. And little did they know the heights that his reputation would take him. So.
We're going to have to close up here soon. Is there any last questions? His art is up here you can look at. He sells his art. Anything else you want me to say, Ani or Brom, before we close up here? There's some books out there. I don't know where his books are. Over there? Okay, that you can look at those. So we're going to be are we allowed to hang around here for a bit, Danny? Pardon? Is your art priced?
It's not priced, but they're all, $75 to $100.
Okay, they're unframed. Is your brother still framing things?
Bill, a bit of a heart condition.
Yeah.
And now is on blood thinners and is scared to death to get around glass or blades.
No, I got to talk to him.
Things like that. So he's kind of hung that up. He'll still do it once in a while, though.
I'll have to chat with him.
But he's still painting. He's still, doing his creative thing. And he also does music. He plays harmonica. So he's got a good friend, Leif Todosek, who's an outstanding guitarist. And between the two of them, they'll jam out in the clubs and hit some of the local establishments that way, too.
Well, I hope you finish that piece there for as much as you're going to finish it. I thank everybody for coming, and can you please thank Brom Wikstrom?
Thank you. Great to be here.
And if any of you are ever up in Anacortes, we're right across the street from the library. You can't miss us. It's the house with the ramp.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.